can start there. So part of your work is reaching out in ministry in the area where you are in Senekal, but you had an amazing experience with farm workers, but particularly a farmer. And let's just start there. Tell us a little bit about that. Would you share that with us?
I grew up in a very small dorpie called Roosendaal. Roosendaal is about 36 km before the border town of Ficksburg, the cherry city in Ficksburg. So I was born there on the farm, as a farm. So from my earliest, time, I got, experience and interaction with a farm life, and get to experience and to appreciate the work that is being done on the farm, and also, the animals and the wonderful life, countryside life. So I'm a farm boy. I don't know if I should say plus Jappy. I don't know what that means actually, but in my heart is, I've always been very fascinated by diversity in everything, diversity in nature, but more so diversity amongst different cultures and different people and how they think and how they practice their daily life. It has always been something that fascinates me, and I had an opportunity also growing up. I grew up without knowing my real dad, and that's the story for another time. But I was blessed later on by a gentleman by the name of James Botha, who got married to my mom and became a father figure in my life. He was a colored man from Welkom. So, that has changed a lot in my life. First of all, having that father figure as a young boy growing up, you always have that desire to have somebody you can call a dad. But secondly, we found ourselves having to speak two languages in the home, because James couldn't speak Sotho, so he was an Afrikaans, and that's why I was sort of inducted into the Afrikaans culture.
And for a while, you were actually known as John Botha.
Yeah, for a while I was known as John Botha because, he really took me as his son. He says, "You are my son."
I don't know if this is going to be prophetic, but Botha plays a big role in South Africa. Louis Botha, 1910,
yeah.
P.W. Botha, Pik Botha, we had Botha Lesi.
I knew it was going to get to the big
Yeah, Botha Lesi, and now we're going to have John Botha in Parliament. I like this. Okay, keep going.
But anyway, to cut the long story short, being a pastor, grew up in that area. I remember one of my mentors told me and said, "John, there is a particular farmer in the area. He's struggling a lot with his workers. And I'm not going to mention the name for the sake of Poppy Act. And he says he's struggling with his farm workers, and he would really love for somebody to come and preach the word to these people. And he set up an appointment between me and him, and we went to see him. And he was one of these farmers that were very tough, very strict. And I mean, he was one of those that can even give you a whip as a worker. He was known in that area as a very hard, farmers. And for me, it was really amazing that, he resorted to the word, because he used to use the fivefold ministry, And he said to me, "John, listen, yes, ek sukkel baie met hierdie mense, hulle altyd, hulle kom by die werk en hulle spop tronk, and they're doing all sorts of things. So I want something that can sort them out. So would you come and preach to them?" And I did that for 2 years, non-stop. Every Sunday I'll do a service in the morning in my church, and then off I go to the farm. But I can tell you, for that 2 years, it was it was like, planting the seed on the rock. Nothing changed. The people were the same. They continued. And, some of them even said, "We know why you are here, and you're not going to change anything until he changes we will not change. And I remember one day he called me to his house, and I went there and he says, listen, John, this is not working. These people don't want to change. And he used a very hard statement and said, they can go to hell. Let them let them go and burn to hell because they're refusing the gospel. But then he said, listen, you can still come to us and Keir, and we can share the word with you and me and my wife. And I said, no, I don't have a problem. I'll definitely do that. And I wasn't aware that God was doing something. It was the beginning of a transformational journey. And I remember we walked the road, and towards the end of the year, one day we were sharing a communion on the table, and he started weeping, like tears rolling on his face. And he says, John, you don't realize how God has used you to break the walls of resentment, especially for black people. You are the first black person to come in my house, to sit on my table, and to drink my coffee with me. And you have allowed me to see beyond color. And you got to understand, I was not raised like that. I was raised in that environment where you are taught them and us, as growing up as a young boy. And he was crying. I mean, it was a very phenomenal moment for us. But even for myself, because that helped me now to change the way I look at, other people and other races and their struggles. Because sometimes we don't understand, and I think you mentioned that, talking about black pain and white fear. We don't see each other in that way. We always see each other as enemies, and we justify why I wouldn't, interact with this person. And that has changed the way I looked at how God can use us, especially as children of God, to break those walls. And I think that's one of the things that propelled me into the ministry of reconciliation, knowing that because I've experienced that. And today he went to be with the Lord, but he was one of the greatest friends that I had. And even though some of his people, remained the same, but he changed, his heart changed. And that is the story that I believe can change the relations between different races in South Africa. If we can just realize that we are all coming from a different backgrounds and we were raised in a different way. But if we want to see this country going forward, we have to step in each other's shoes and see beyond the pain and see beyond the fear and place yourself into a place and say, how can I be a blessing and help for my brother? So that's the story.
John, thank you. That is so beautiful. That's a story that shows 2 years of hard labor. And God breaks through. And then he breaks the relationship. He breaks into the relationship. And he breaks us, and we are broken. Now tell us a little bit about, you shared a little bit about farms and farming community. How's it going in Senekal? How's it going up there? What's the race relationships? Are people invading land? Are there any black farmers in your area? Tell us about what's happening there in the farming community.
No, absolutely not. There's not any land expropriation that we have experienced, and we hope that it will never happen because we know it's not good for our nation. But however, we have experienced, I think in a way in Senekal we have been so blessed. We've got so many black farmers, including my father-in-law. He's in farming and he's one of the successful farmers in the area of Senekal. In fact, I think a radio station from Canada have just covered that story of him, how he came into the farming. And he will tell you, and he tells this story as well in this documentary, that if it was not of his colleagues, the white farmers around there in Senekal, who came for his aid and helped him and shared the knowledge, he wouldn't have been, where he is today. And I mean, I'm talking about somebody, a farmer who's winning, competitions and championships in terms of the agricultural sector. And that is the kind of relationship. And it's not only him. I mean, we've got young guys who are really into farming and they're doing very well. But the relationship between, the experienced and upcoming farmers is something that gives hope. And I think that is the solution. That is what we should actually focus on and say, how can we hold hands together? Because as much as Khutjo wants to be a farmer, I mean, I don't see myself as a farmer. I think I will make a mess of it. But I know there are also, black guys that wants to get into farming. And instead of focusing on, whose farm can we take to give it to somebody, we should actually be creative and say, how can we build, communities of mentorship and programs where those who are, desire to be to play part in farming can actually benefit from those experiences. And a lot of my friends, I've got a lot of, white farmers who are also very good friend of ours. And a lot of them are involved in this kind of programs, mentorship programs. And I think that gives South Africa hope. There are farmers, white farmers, who are willing, to lend a hand, to say we want to be part of the solution. We don't want to be part of the problem in South Africa.
And we need to really give those guys airtime and say, this is what you're doing. And I know you've been recently with Johan Erasmus, Peter Einders and those guys. They're trying to show people it's not all doom and gloom in the countryside. They're farmers who are actually really working towards land reform and uplifting black commercial farmers. I know in our area we've got some top farmers. Part of the difficulty we face is the access to the land. And this is where maybe the Equitable Access to Land Bill might actually help to give people access to land. At one stage there were almost 5,000 farms that had been purchased by the state that hadn't been allocated to black families or farmers. So we've got a lot of challenges in that. But I think what you're saying, and what I've seen as well in my area, is that there's an incredible amount of goodwill in the farming community. I mean, if you just go to what happened at Nampo last week, there was our president saying, I'm a farmer here, and I'm with you guys, because it's real. And I find living in a farming community one of the most humbling experiences, where people really pull together in the most incredible way, and where people really want to know each other.
No, absolutely. One story, I mean, you mentioned a very important thing there, Andrew, that the problem is we didn't have, and I think if the government can focus on that mentorship program, because there's a lot of experienced farmers who are willing, to be part of that. They want the black farmers to do well. I remember a story, I was still very young at that time. You mentioned Max Dupree's, he's a journalist. He actually bought a farm there in Roosendaal, where I'm coming from. He was a farmer there, and I think it was early 1994, 1995, 1996. He was one of the first, white farmers who said, listen, we want to be part of empowering black people. And he gave his whole farm, everything, implements, everything, very good soil. But the problem with that is that there wasn't a mentorship. There wasn't, a plan to say, okay, these guys have been working on the farm. They know how to put the seed in the ground, but the business side of the farm, they do not know. And it's such a sad story that farm, collapsed, and the municipality had to take it from the people. It's one of the very, very painful stories, especially in my community there in Roosendaal. But the heart was there. The heart was there. And I'm not saying that people must give their farms, but I'm saying there must be a willingness to say, I want to be part of the solution. because there are those who actually did that. You know, some people didn't even give their farms. I know farmers that even said, listen, I've got this X amount of hectares, and if there are serious farmers, black small farmers, and they want to do farming, first of all, I will make available a land, 2 hectares, 3 hectares, and I want to get involved to train them and to help them to make a success. And if they are successful, then we can have a plan. And I think that's how, and there are already farmers who are doing that, you know, especially in the Western Cape. I'm going to be interviewing some of them, you know, with my podcast, because these are the stories. In Kroonstad, we have an incredible farmers as well who are doing the same. They even started an academy where they are training young farmers, because these are people who say, listen, we want to be part of the solution. What the government is proposing in those vague clauses that you have shared with us is not the solution. Maybe the other things are solution, but the vague clauses is not a solution, because it threatens people, it makes people to worry, to say, you know, what's going to happen? What if you have, you know, John becoming a president and he's the radical, and he can use that clause to take my property? And that's why I think it's important that ordinary South Africans must come to the table, because if we leave it to the politicians, if we leave it to the government, we are not going to solve the issue.
One of the stats that I have, that's on one of those slides that you can have a look at, shows that the acquisition of farmland by black people in the private market, willing buyer, willing seller, has exceeded the land that the state has purchased for land reform in the last 30 years. That shows what's happening in our economy. Come on, let's get on with it. Let's do it more. My neighbor on the farm next door, the late David Clyley, bought the farm next door. He was a member of parliament. He was absolutely against giving people land. He said, if you get it for free, you're going to throw it away. He purchased the farm. And that's a whole different story. But there are things that are happening in the private space that you say, these things are exceeding it. Thank you, John. Oh,
and buying that farm, by the way, you know, it builds in the integrity and dignity of black people. One of and I don't know if Khutjo will agree with me, the whole mentality of entitlement, you know, our people being given things for free, it doesn't help with our dignity. We are not dignified when we become, you know, the charity case. But the empowerment is what restores that dignity. And there are so many ways that we can empower those who were previously disadvantaged without making them feel that they are entitled and they're going to get things for free. One of my friends where I'm coming from, they were also beneficiaries of a land like that, where the government just gave them a land and gave them cattle, everything, and they said, off you go. You know, every weekend those guys will bring one cattle and they sell it in the township for the funerals until there was nothing on the farm. You know what is the reason? They got it for free. But if you work for it, you know, if you can prove yourself, and that's what I think the young, especially the young farmers and the young people in South Africa, they want to be given an opportunity and access to prove themselves.
I nominate John as Minister of Agriculture, but nobody's listening, so...
I second that.
It is hereby agreed. John, thank you. Let's give John a round of applause on those. Thank you, John. And follow the story, and the story of your father-in-law, Cecilia, your father. If we can get links to that, that'll be so great to follow that. Yeah. Let's come to Khutjo. Khutjo Maganyele. He's from Limpopo. He's, as you've heard, he's an attorney. And Khutjo and I have known each other for now 11 years, 12 years.
Around the years.
Yeah. And tell us a bit about your experience of the land, growing up and working the land, and your family, and some of those experiences. Let's start with that.
Dumelang. Good day. So my name is Khutjo Innocent Maganyele. I come from a small town in Limpopo called Mokopane. Others might know it as Pietbot Gidersres. That's where I grew up. So I was raised by my grandfather. I don't have a father like Boot John. So I was raised by my grandfather, who was heavily involved in farming. But we were not farming for commercial purposes. The purpose was to feed his family and those who were in need in the community. We also had pigs at home. So most times, waking up at 4 o'clock, going to the farm. We actually had 2 farms that we were operating. We were planting maize there. So my connection to the land started from a very early age. But we didn't have a title deed because we lived on what they call a communal land or tribal land.
And I want to add something here. Khutjo and I have often spoken about a work ethic. And Khutjo has come out and he stayed with us on the farm many times. And sometimes we all have to work physically. This man
all the time.
This man has a strong physical work ethic. He's learned to work a full day manual labor. And that you learn from your grandfather.
Indeed. I mean, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And this is how he would wake you up, but you would have to judge whether this is going to be a long day or just an in and out. So you normally wake up at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, you're on the road. And then he would say to me, no, we're just going to check this pole, see whether the fence is still connected. Then you know it's going to be a long day. So there were plenty of times me and him worked. It was just the 2 of us on the farm. He installed quite a lot of values that today are helping me.
Now tell us about the land. Now, do you still work that land? What's happened to that land?
Like I said previously, we didn't own the land. We utilized the land, like most people within our community. And, we didn't have any issues of where does your land start or finish. Everyone knew exactly how these things operate. Unfortunately, I can see that a lot of people are concerned about expropriation of land, and our land has been expropriated. So I've already experienced what it feels to lose your land. The 2 farms that we own were absorbed by the mines that are currently operating in our area. The discussion with the government was our family would be compensated for the loss of those land. So essentially, we don't have those land anymore.
And the tragedy is now, if you'd been given money for that, from what I've seen, what would have happened to the money?
We have not been given any compensation for the land. But this is where I look at things differently. So when the government took this land and gave it to Patrice Motsepe and the Chinese government, the Chinese company that is now running a mine there, I could have easily said, I'm a lawyer, let me go sue them for my compensation. But the purpose of having that mine there is going to employ many, many, many other people. So I could have looked at what I'm losing and not what the community is going to gain. However, I am disappointed that the mining company has not benefited the people of Mokopane properly. Yeah, that is the unfortunate truth.
Yeah, so the big thing is just a balancing. What you're trying to do is you're balancing that. And may the Lord bless you with other land. We're trying to make him a Hlubi or a Pondo where he lives. He's no longer going to be a Pedi. So he must settle in our area now.
Well, if, and I say this, if we expropriate your land, I would have a land, you see. And I have been trying to expropriate. I've taken his office before, so.
Yeah, he moved into my office in Matati. I was squatted there for 2 years, so I just gave it up to him. And I said, well, okay, you take over now. Let's go.
Bit by bit.
And now, so Khutjo, when you think of, and now, so you came down, you were a young student when we met, you came in and stayed with us on the farm from time to time. How did you view Afrikaans and white people? And has that changed for you in any way over the last years?
So 2013, I went to Witwatersrand. 2014 or 2015, we have what they call Feesmustfall. Now, my heart is for the people. Obviously, I'm involved. I was involved to such an extent that some of us, we were arrested. But being a vet student, we were released, fortunately. So that whole period of being involved in activism, you see, activism that is not guided by biblical principles can also take you in the wrong way, right? So in that process, one had views of the land must return back to its rightful owners. But I've had many, many intense fellowships with Andrew here about this topic. And having stayed on the farm with his family and how they have treated me, it becomes impossible for me to now say, I'm taking away your land, especially knowing that the land itself does not even have all these connotations of people took this land from this one, they were removed, and all of those things. So it becomes very difficult to look at someone that you know and say to them, I am going to bring pain into your life. However, this is where I struggle. I fear that there are those in this country who do not see the poverty that exists. There are young people who are interested in working the land. There should be an opportunity for those young people to work the land. The government, in terms of tribal land, there's a lot of land that the government owns. They have not given any thought of, let's give these people title deed so that they are able to work the land and produce. For you to be able to work the land, you need skill, you need money. Those things, the government or our leaders has disappointed in terms of empowering black people who live on tribal land, you see.
You know, we have some of the most robust discussions.
So no, I wouldn't take it from you.
But you know, we've got to get to a place where I've said to him, you know, if my title deed stands in the way of you or me serving God, well, tear up my title deed. It's God's land anyway. You heard Raham. It belongs to him. But what Khutjo has come, and he's come alongside us as a white family, and he said, I see where you are. And I come alongside Khutjo and I say, hey, my brother, I see where you are. You know what my heart says? I want to go and fight for the land that his grandfather used to used to plant up there so they can have it back. I want to do that. You know, so now because I love him. He's my brother. He's like a son.
Can I, just an indication of how, as Christians, and you will forgive me, but when I opened my law firm, I'm a young man from Limpopo. I go to the Eastern Cape. I do my articles. Lovely time with my principal. Thereafter, now I need to think about the future. I need to open a law firm. I don't have a job anymore. Where do I open a law firm? You still need the land. Fortunately, Duminy had land. And he made it available to us. And I say us because I don't work by myself. I work with other young black people. I'm hoping that there's going to be another one who joins us in the near future, who is white, by the way. So I'm very much for empowerment all across the board. But if God had not placed in Mr. Duminy's heart that let us make this space available to these young people, not for free. I don't want to feel as if this thing I have not worked hard for. That's not what God wants for us. So, in that way, I think that's an excellent example of how we can actually empower one another. You don't have to change a title deed in order to empower another person. So that's just a small but big,
We're here as the body of Christ to walk a road together. And I've seen how his firm, with one of the guys who works for him, is working in the community, blessing the community. And I'm saying, wow, Lord, we've got to give. We've got to give so that your blessing goes into the community, black and white working together.
I actually, when we were coming down from the Eastern Cape, we had also intense fellowships with Stefani about these issues. And I said something about, I do not necessarily care for money. I care for what money can do in the community. That's what we are here for. I can't look at my brother struggle and I just sit back and say, God will bless you. God has already blessed me to be a blessing to him. You see? So even the mentality within our firm, and sometimes you'll find us praying there. We'll invite you one day. But sometimes you'll find us talking about God. I mean, it's a law office. We should be talking about constitution and all of that, but we're talking about God. And those people that I work with are very involved in the community. So you see the blessing. One of the things that one of my employees does is work with drug addicts within the community. So here's a blessing that comes to the Duminies. The Duminies decide to bless me, Maganyele. We then are able to open a firm, hire other people. Those people are then able to work and also invest in other people. Do you see the multiplier effect that happens just from? So this is exactly what we are called to do as Christians. If you wait for the leaders to do something, we're going to wait a long time.
We didn't plan to share this, by the way. But it's maybe important for us to hear this. If God gives us resources, not for ourselves. And if that's our heart when we come to this land discussion, I think it's going to change things. I think we'll be able to see it differently. Stewardship as well. Yes, we've got to be responsible and so on, but how do we uplift people? And there are so many ways. And I know the Bible says, don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. But sometimes it's important when I say, well done, Khutjo, because I know how he pours resources into people and circumstances and family and friends. And wherever there's a need, say, Lord, please don't send somebody else to Khutjo. Because then it just, but that's the way the Lord is blessing and working. So when it comes to the land, now I want to bring this back to the land. This is how we are talking about we should live. Francis Schaeffer has that whole series that in the Liberty movement of the How Should We Then Live series. And I come back to that so often. How should we as Christians live? And it applies to everything, because the kingdom of God is relevant to every single part of our lives, including my possessions, including the land, including my relationships with people. This is how God is calling us to live in a different way, wherever we are. And if it comes to building that relationship that says this is our future, well, let's go there. Let's say, okay, Lord, what do you want for us?